They say some secrets are buried so deep that even speaking their names aloud feels like tearing open a wound that was never meant to heal. I never believed that. Not until I found myself standing at the edge of the Blackwood Forest in rural Appalachia, staring at a house that shouldn't exist on any map, holding a letter written in handwriting that belonged to my grandmother, a woman who died 3 months before I was born. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, no return address, just my name written in that unmistakable script I'd seen in old family albums, and inside, 5 words that would change everything. Come home before the blood moon. My grandmother, Thorne, was what the family called peculiar. That's the polite Southern way of saying she terrified everyone who knew her. She delivered babies in a time when hospitals were becoming the norm, but the women in our county, they still came to her, in the middle of the night. Through snowstorms, through floods, they came to Eleanor's house deep in the woods, and they came out different, changed. The babies she delivered, they say, never cried, not once. They would just open their eyes and stare, like they already knew something the rest of us had forgotten. I'm Dr. Sarah Thorne now. I deliver babies in a sterile hospital with machines that beep and monitors that track every heartbeat. I thought I'd escaped the superstitions of my bloodline. I thought I was free. But that letter, it was written on paper that smelled like iron and earth, and when I held it up to the light, I could see what looked like tiny handprints pressed into the fibers. Infant handprints. Dozens of them. The drive from Atlanta to Granger's Hollow takes 6 hours if you follow normal roads. I found myself on roads that aren't on GPS. Roads that twisted back on themselves. Roads where the trees lean in so close you can hear them whispering. And they do whisper. I'm not being poetic. There's a sound those mountains make that isn't wind, isn't animals. It's older than that. The house stood exactly where the letter's crude map indicated. Victorian architecture swallowed by kudzu and time, windows like black eyes, a porch that sagged like a broken spine. But the door was open, just slightly, just enough to be an invitation or a warning. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dried herbs and something else. Copper, blood, but old blood, soaked into the floorboards generations ago. The walls were covered in symbols I didn't recognize at first, spirals within circles, figures with too many limbs, words in a language that hurt to look at, and photographs, hundreds of them, babies. Just babies, all staring at the camera with those same knowing eyes. I found the room at the end of the upstairs hallway, the birthing room. It was exactly as my mother had described it in the fragmented stories she would tell when she drank too much wine on holidays. The stories she would deny the next morning. A large circular room with windows on all sides, but the glass was stained dark red, so the light that came through turned everything the color of a womb. In the center was a chair, not a bed. A chair carved from a single piece of black wallwood, with armrests that curved inward and leg rests that spread outward, and grooves worn smooth where thousands of hands had gripped, where thousands of women had pushed new life into the world. But it was the symbols carved into the chair that made my medical training, all my rational understanding of childbirth, suddenly feel like a thin curtain over something vast and terrible. They were the same symbols from the walls, but these were older, deeper, carved with such precision that they seemed to move in my peripheral vision. And beneath the chair, carved into the floor in a perfect circle, was a question in English, worn but readable. What do you remember from before? I heard the footsteps behind me too late. When I turned, there were 3 women standing in the doorway. Old women, ancient, really. Their skin had that translucent quality of very old paper, and their eyes were completely white. No iris, no pupil, just milky white. But they could see me. I knew they could see me better than I could see myself. The tallest one spoke first. Her voice sounded like stones grinding together. Eleanor said you would come, said you were the one who would remember. I don't understand, I managed to say. My grandmother is dead. Dead? The second woman laughed, a sound like wind through a cracked window. Death is just another room, child. Eleanor walks through many rooms now. She sent us to show you what she showed your mother, and what your mother could not bear to remember." The third woman, who had not yet spoken, stepped forward and placed something in my hand. It was warm, wet. When I looked down, I was holding a caul, the membrane that sometimes covers a baby's head at birth. But this one was different. It was moving, pulsing, and inside it I could see something, images, memories, not mine. "Put it on," the first woman said. "Cover your eyes with it. See what the babies see. See what we've been protecting all these generations." Every instinct screamed no. But my hands were already moving, lifting the caul to my face. The moment it touched my skin, the world inverted. I was in the chair, but I wasn't me. I was every woman who had ever sat in that chair, all at once. I was giving birth, but birth to what? The baby that emerged wasn't just a baby. It was a door, a passage, and through that door I could see them, the others. The ones who exist in the spaces between moments. The ones who have been waiting since before humans learned to make fire. Waiting for the invitation that only childbirth provides. That moment when the veil between worlds is thinnest. When a new soul pushes through from wherever souls come from. And I understood. The ritual wasn't about calling them. It was about keeping them out. Every symbol, every word, every gesture that Eleanor and the grandmothers before her had performed, they were locks, seals, protections, because in that moment of birth, when a mother is torn open and vulnerable, when a baby is between worlds, the others try to slip through. They try to wear the baby like a suit. They try to pour themselves into that fresh, unmarked consciousness. Most babies do cry when they're born. The cry is a spell, an ancient sound that slams the door shut. But some babies, the ones Eleanor delivered, they saw the others trying to come through. They saw what was waiting on the other side. And the shock of it struck them silent. Eleanor's ritual, the hidden ritual, was about teaching those babies how to close the door from the inside. How to seal themselves so completely that nothing else could ever get in. I tore the caul from my face, gasping. The three women were gone, but I wasn't alone. Standing in the corner of the room, translucent but undeniable, was my grandmother. She looked younger than in any photograph I'd ever seen. Her hair long and dark, her eyes clear. She smiled at me, and it was sad and proud and sorry all at once. Every 6 generations, she said, her voice echoing from somewhere that wasn't quite the room. The memory fades. The ritual is forgotten, and they start getting through. You've seen it, haven't you, Sarah, in your hospital? The babies that stare too long. The ones who don't react right. The ones whose eyes are old. I had seen them. I'd called it neurological delay, sensory processing issues, a dozen clinical terms, but now I knew. Some of those babies hadn't been able to close the door. Something else was looking through their eyes. Why me? I asked. Why did you choose me to know this? Because you're pregnant, Eleanor said simply. My hand went to my stomach instinctively. I was 3 weeks along. I hadn't told anyone. I'd barely confirmed it myself. Your daughter will be born on the blood moon, Eleanor continued, and she will see them more clearly than any child in 6 generations. She will be the one they want most. So I'm giving you what your mother rejected. The knowledge, the ritual, the protection. The room began to fill with smoke. Or maybe it was more like the walls were dissolving. I could see through them now to all the other birthing rooms in all the other times. Could see Eleanor and the grandmothers before her. Could see women sitting in that chair dating back to when it wasn't a chair but a stone. Dating back to when humans first learned to birth their children in sacred spaces instead of open fields. The ritual begins 30 days before the birth, Eleanor said, and her voice was becoming many voices, all the grandmothers speaking as one. Every night you draw the circle, you speak the old words, you teach your daughter, while she's still inside you, while she can still hear everything you know, how to recognize the door and keep it closed. You teach her that she is not empty, not a vessel, but a complete soul with no room for anything else. But how? I asked. I don't know the words. I don't know the symbols. Elinor smiled. You do. You've always known. It's written in your blood. When the time comes, your hands will remember what your mind forgot. She was fading now, the room solidifying back into its decrepit reality. One more thing. Her voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. The babies that don't cry. They're not broken. They're warriors. They've seen the enemy and shut the door in its face. They're the strongest souls that exist. Never pity them. Honor them. Then she was gone, and I was alone in that red-lit room with a choice to make. I could leave. I could go back to Atlanta, back to my sterile hospital, back to my rational world. I could deliver my daughter under fluorescent lights with an epidural and fetal monitors, and pretend that birth is just biology, just physics, just cells dividing and cervixes dilating. I could hope that whatever door opens would close on its own, that my daughter would be one of the lucky ones, or I could stay. I could learn what Elinor wanted me to learn. I could perform a ritual that no medical textbook would ever acknowledge, that would sound insane if I tried to explain it to anyone who hadn't stood in this room, who hadn't seen what I'd seen. I chose to stay. For 30 days, I lived in that house. The 3 women came every evening and taught me things that should not be possible. How to weave protection into lullabies. How to draw symbols with my own blood that would mark my daughter as sealed territory. How to speak to the child inside me in a language older than English, older than Latin, older than any written word. They taught me that birth is a battleground, that every mother is a warrior whether she knows it or not, and that the greatest battles are fought not with weapons but with will. They showed me the book, the hidden record that Elinor had kept. Names and dates going back to 1743. To the first Elinor, who had learned the ritual from a woman who claimed to be far older than that. A woman who might have been one of the others herself, who might have defected, who might have decided that humans were worth protecting. Every birth was recorded, every baby delivered, and beside each name was a mark, a circle for those who closed the door successfully, a circle with a line through it for those who didn't. Most had circles. But there were enough with lines to make me understand the stakes. And next to those lined circles were sometimes notes, drowned at 3 days. Disappeared from cradle, grew wrong. Elinor's handwriting noted what happened when the others got through, how they wore children like ill-fitting clothes, how they never quite learned to imitate human behavior correctly. On the night of the blood moon, I went into labor in that chair. The 3 women were there, and dozens of others I couldn't quite see, shadows of all the grandmothers who had performed this ritual before. They chanted in that old language while I breathed and pushed, while my daughter fought her way into the world. And in that moment between contractions, in that space where the pain retreated for just a breath, I saw it. The door, shimmering in the air above me, a wound in reality, and pressing against it were faces that weren't faces, forms that weren't forms, desperate to push through, to find the new soul entering the world to claim her. But I was ready. I spoke the words Elinor had taught me, words that tasted like metal and earth. I drew the final symbol in the air with my own blood, a spiral that closed in on itself, a lock that only I could set. And when my daughter emerged silent and staring, I saw her eyes focus on the door, saw her tiny face set with an expression far too old, far too knowing. She saw them. I know she saw them. And then she blinked, and I watched the door seal itself, watched reality knit back together, watched the others retreat, frustrated and furious. My daughter didn't cry. She just looked at me with those ancient eyes and slowly, deliberately, closed them, as if to say, I know, I saw, and I shut them out. The women were gone when I opened my eyes. Just me and my daughter in that red-lit room, in that chair that had held so many mothers. I wrapped her in a blanket I'd brought from home, something normal, something from the world I understood, but I knew I would never fully live in that world again. I named her Eleanor, of course. It seemed only right. And I left the house with her that night, walked back to my car down those whispering roads, drove back to Atlanta as the sun rose. But before I left, I did one more thing. I carved my daughter's name into the book, in the space Eleanor had left blank, marked it with a circle, a perfect circle, and wrote beside it, "She remembers." My daughter is 3 years old now. She still hasn't spoken her first word, and the pediatricians are concerned. They want to run tests. They mention autism spectrum develop, mental delays, hearing problems, but I watch her and I know she's not delayed. She's guarding herself. She's keeping that door locked so tightly that even normal communication feels like a risk, like she might accidentally let something in if she opens her mouth. But sometimes, late at night, I hear her humming. It's the same melody the 3 women chanted during the ritual. She couldn't possibly remember that she wasn't even born yet, but she does. It's in her blood, in her bones, in whatever place inside us holds memories that don't belong to this lifetime. And sometimes I catch her staring at empty corners of her room, her eyes tracking something I can't see, her face set in that same determined expression she had the moment she was born. She's watching the door, making sure it stays closed. I'm pregnant again now, another girl, due on the winter solstice, and I've already packed my bags, already mapped the route back to that house that shouldn't exist, because I know what needs to be done. The ritual isn't a choice, it's a responsibility. It's the price we pay for bringing new souls into a world where other things are always waiting, always hungry, always patient. Last week, a mother came to me in the hospital. Her baby was 2 weeks old and wouldn't stop staring. The pediatric team wanted to admit for observation, but the mother pulled me aside, desperate, and whispered, "My grandmother used to tell stories about a woman named Eleanor who delivered babies in the mountains. She said those babies were protected. She said they saw things others couldn't and learned how to look away. I think my son sees something. I think something is trying to get in." I looked at her baby, those eyes, too old, too focused on something just behind me, and I saw it. The door hadn't fully closed. It was still cracked, just a sliver, but enough. Something was waiting for the right moment to push through completely. "Come with me," I told her. That night, I taught her what Eleanor taught me. In a hospital supply closet, of all places, with her baby between us, I spoke the old words and drew the symbols and showed her how to seal what should have been sealed at birth. Her baby cried for the first time when we finished. A loud, angry, beautiful cry that meant the door had finally shut. "How did you know?" she asked me, tears streaming down her face. "Because I'm a grandmother now," I said, even though I'm only 34. Not of age, of knowledge, and it's my job to remember what others forget. She asked if there were others like us. I told her the truth. There have always been others. In every culture, in every time, women who knew the secret of birth, who understood that they were standing at a threshold between worlds, who learned the rituals to protect what came through. The details change, the words, the symbols, the ceremonies, but the truth remains the same. Birth is a door, and there are always things trying to come through doors. I've started documenting everything, not in the old book. That stays in the house in the mountains, a record for the grandmothers who come after. But in encrypted files, in hidden folders, in notes that I'm leaving for my daughters and their daughters, because Eleanor was right. Every 6 generations, the memory fades. The ritual becomes a story, becomes a superstition, becomes nothing. And when it becomes nothing, the others start getting through. The hospital staff think I'm eccentric now. Dr. Thorne who burns sage in the break room. Dr. Thorne who hums strange melodies while delivering babies. Dr. Thorne who sometimes draws symbols on her palms before putting on surgical gloves. They tolerate it because I'm good at my job, because the babies I deliver are healthy, because the mothers trust me. But what they don't see is the other work I'm doing, the protection I'm weaving into every delivery, The small rituals I perform that look like personal quirks, but are actually ancient defenses. The way I whisper to the babies as they emerge, teaching them wordlessly to slam that door shut, to claim their bodies as their own, to reject anything that tries to pour into them from the spaces between. Most of them never see the door. They're born crying, immediately present, immediately sealed. They're safe without ever knowing danger existed. But some, maybe 1 in 50, maybe 1 in 100, they see it. I know them instantly, the silent ones, the starers, and I make sure to catch the mothers before they leave, to slip them a card with a phone number, to tell them there's a support group for mothers of observant children. And when they call that number, I teach them what they need to know. We're growing, a network of mothers who remember, women who perform the ritual in hospital rooms and birthing centers and homes. Women who understand that we're not fighting something with medicine or science, but with something older than both. We're the guardians of the threshold. We're the ones who make sure that when a baby comes into this world, they come alone. Yesterday, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, fold, sepia-toned, from the 1800s. It showed a woman standing in front of the house in the mountains. She was holding a baby, and written on the back in handwriting I recognized, even though it should have been impossible. They've been trying since the beginning. We've been stopping them since the beginning. Never forget. My hand went to my belly, where my second daughter is growing, where she's already learning the old songs, already preparing for what she'll need to do when it's her time to come through the door. I'll take her to the house. I'll sit in the chair, and I'll make sure she knows how to close that door so tight that nothing will ever get in, because that's what we do. We're the secret grandmothers, the hidden midwives, the women who remember what everyone else forgot. We stand at the threshold, we guard the door, and we make sure that when a child is born, they belong only to themselves, only to this world, and not to anything that waits in the spaces between. The ritual they hid for 6 generations isn't hidden anymore. I'm making sure of that. I'm teaching anyone who will listen, because the others are patient, but so are we, and we've been doing this a lot longer than they've been trying to get through. My daughter Eleanor is watching me write this now. She still hasn't spoken, but she just walked over and put her hand on my belly, on her sister, and hummed that ancient melody. And I swear, I felt the baby inside me respond. A kick that felt less like movement and more like acknowledgement. She knows they both know, and when the time comes they'll remember. That's all the protection any of us really have. Memory, the memory of what came before, what was fought, what was won. As long as one of us remembers, as long as one of us performs the ritual, as long as one of us stands guard at that threshold and says, "No, you cannot have this one," then we're safe, and I'll make sure someone always remembers. Even if it takes another 6 generations. Even if it takes forever.